In what moment did you realize your life would never be the same? I was 14. No friends. Each day I dragged myself home to where I lived with my schizophrenic mother. Just the two of us. I would be in trouble for something. I lived in a perpetual state of confusion as I often couldn't remember what she told me I had done. She told me I was stupid and needed to go to a special school because I didn't know what I had done wrong. In the past she had often slapped me until my nose bled and beat me with the metal pole of a fly swatter, but that stopped the summer before high school. She told me she didn't love me repeatedly for months. According to her, I was a horrible daughter. Her friends from church had stopped coming weekly to yell at me and slap me senseless as well. I knew when she sent me away with my aunt and uncle the summer that had passed she had read my diary, where I detailed all the abuse and talked about wanting to die. She denied reading it, but it stopped the physical abuse, so now it was just verbal, and believe it or not, that hurt just as bad. I was unlovable and alone. She didn't work and depended on government assistance. She just sat at home chain smoking and playing cards. During the week I woke myself up, made breakfast, went to school. She complained about the smell of eggs in the morning, and of course I was useless. I had a hard time socializing, and she decided she didn't like the friends I'd managed to make the previous year, so put me in a very small private Christian high school the church paid for. As a low-income, single-parent house, I was a freak among higher-income two-parent families, so I spent my days an outsider and bullied at school and then came home to be bullied some more. I got in trouble once because someone told her I walked around with my head down and never smiled. I remember trying out and making the school play that year. I was so proud. My mother decided to use that as leverage for her every whim. If I did anything wrong, sang doing dishes, she threatened to not allow me to be in the play. It got so bad I just quit the play rather than have it continually be held over my head as a threat. A school counselor regularly made me talk to him. I refused to give anything up. He persisted. He asked me if I was abused. As she was no longer hitting me, I said no. I had no words to explain the verbal abuse. Being stupid and unlovable didn't seem to qualify. Then one magical day a girl at school approached me and we became friends. A few weeks later she asked me if I could spend the weekend at her house. Her house was beautiful and she lived with her parents and siblings, and it was loud, noisy and chaotic. On the Saturday of this weekend sleepover, my new friend had to take piano lessons, so I was to hang out in her room until she got back. I was surprised when both her parents wanted to speak with me while she was gone. They informed me that the school had asked them to be my foster parents and presented me with a contract. They gave me 30 minutes to decide if I wanted to live with them. I was 14 years old. I had no friends. My mother was the only family I had ever known. I knew I was stupid. I knew that I was worthless and unlovable. 30 minutes was a ridiculous amount of time for a decision that would change the course of my life that I was too young to make. I didn't know these people at all, but a voice in my head screamed at me to do it, with everything it had. So I took that leap of faith. I jumped off the cliff away from everything I'd ever known. Don't announce your engagement at someone else's wedding, or this might just happen to you. Last summer I was at a cousin's wedding. His bride and her family had been close with ours since before I was born, and the couple had known each other since they were toddlers, so it was a particularly exciting event for both sides of the family. However, after the ceremony was over and the party had only just started, one of the bridesmaids decided to announce her own engagement. The attention was immediately taken away from the newlyweds and brought to the bridesmaid, who I'll call Sarah, and her equally smug fiancé. My cousin's wife, I'll call her Emma, didn't make a scene or utter a single negative word about Sarah. She looked like she was on the verge of tears, but she kept grinning and acted very happy for the other couple. This was unusual, as Emma is typically quite confrontational and speaks her mind no matter the consequences. Sarah later picked Emma to be the maid of honor at her own wedding, which took place last weekend. I wasn't there for it, but my cousin sent me some of the best bits on Snapchat and explained the whole situation. This is where the fun begins. Emma's two much younger sisters were the flower girls at Sarah's wedding. At the very last moment, Emma switched out the white petals in their baskets to blue ones she had secretly brought with her. She told her sisters not to say anything about it or let the bride see them until it was time to scatter them down the aisle. Sarah looked very confused upon seeing the blue petals, which didn't coordinate whatsoever with her theme, but of course she didn't say anything about it in the moment. Most of Sarah's other bridesmaids were also Emma's friends, had attended Emma's wedding, and were in on Emma's scheme. At the reception, Emma's sisters and the other bridesmaids were tight-lipped when Sarah began demanding to know why there were blue petals. The wedding planner ended up getting a lot of abuse for not checking the flower girls' baskets before they walked down the aisle. Finally, it was time for the speeches. The speeches took place in front of a massive screen, displaying a loop of photos with Sarah and her husband, which had been compiled by Emma. Emma took the remote that controlled the presentation screen, and at first she showed some pre-approved humorous photos of Sarah with Emma and other friends to facilitate a couple lighthearted jokes. Then, at the very end, Emma said to Sarah that she must be wondering why there were blue petals instead of the white ones originally planned. That was when Emma displayed the last slide from her presentation. Emma announced in front of everyone that she was 5 months pregnant, and that she just discovered the baby was a boy, hence the blue petals. The last slide? Her ultrasound picture. There were shocked yells and gasps. Sarah had a fit, but those involved in the scheme cheered so loudly that I sincerely regret watching the Snapchat recordings with headphones. Apparently Sarah had been very nasty to her bridesmaids before, driving several of them away and forcing the others to pay ridiculous amounts of money for dresses. Emma and my cousin were eventually thrown out of the party, but they were all smiles. Sarah's fuming mother went to confront her outside, and Emma retorted with, gentle, I'm pregnant. I reckon Sarah doesn't speak to the majority of those bridesmaids anymore. Harass my daughter on Minecraft? You can't hide from me. So, my daughter, who was about 8 at the time, was really into Minecraft, as most kids are these days. Also desperately wanting to join the YouTube/Let's Play culture, I had installed some screen recording software that would let her make videos of the games she was playing so she could later upload them to YouTube. Anyways, one day I'm minding my own business when I hear her quietly sniffling over on the computer. I asked her what was wrong, but she didn't want to tell me, so I let it go, but decided to keep an eye on her. A few minutes later I discovered what was happening. Someone was harassing not only her, but also all the other kids playing on whatever server she was on. This kid, we'll call him Little Poophead, or LS, was saying poop about how he was going to assault my 8-year-old daughter. She told him how old she was, hoping he would stop, how he was going to hack into her IP and steal all her info, swearing profusely, remember, this is a game for kids, etc. etc. By this time I had gotten my fiancée involved, and she was also obviously quite upset at what a little poop this kid was being. We realized that our daughter had been recording the entire incident, and a plan began to form. I started by Googling LS's username. There were several hits immediately, the most interesting of which involved a page where he was publicly applying to be a mod for a server on Minecraft. I was able to learn a lot about this little poss. He claimed to be 15, likes hockey, used to live in Toronto but now lives in Florida. But the bombshell was easily his Skype contact info. It was literally first name dot last name. I know your name now, you little poop. So I head over to Facebook and search for the name. Nothing. On a hunch I searched for just the last name, while narrowing my results to only the state of Florida. Several dozen hits. So I have to start combing through each one, until I find what I was looking for. A middle-aged man with the same last name, whose profile indicates he was born in Toronto and now lives in Florida. I found your dad, you little poop. So I sent him a message on Facebook, asking if he had a son named first name who goes by his username on Minecraft. Dad confirmed I had the right guy. So my wife begins telling the dad everything that LS was saying to my daughter, and we sent him the recorded video as proof. Radio silence for a few days. Then we got the message back. LS had his computer taken away from him for the entire summer, and had also been lying about his age. He was only 11, I think. His parents were effing livid with him, and he surely hated the next few months of his life. No one messes with my daughter. The time I ruined my high school teacher's career and got her fired in the greatest way possible. This story is widely known amongst my family and is constantly brought up and joked upon in my group of friends even years later. A buddy of mine suggested that this is the perfect place to make it public, so let's get into this poop storm. Backstory: I was a senior in high school at the time and I had never been the brightest student. I was a solid C student and I had never received a detention or had any kind of bad student record. This is important because to this day, I still have no idea why the teacher treated me this way. The teacher, who we will name Mrs. Frank, had been a teacher there for more than a decade and was widely known for being a petty heartless bitch who the administrators saw as the golden child. Mrs. Frank taught algebra, which is my worst subject, so naturally I had issues understanding the lessons and would ask questions frequently. To some these questions are easily answered, but to me it was rocket science. Usually when someone asks a dumb question, no one should address it. However, in Mrs. Frank's case, she would belittle me in front of everyone by saying things such as, "And here comes the slow boy again. Wow, surprise, surprise, you don't understand it again, really? We have to go extra slow for you today, don't we, etc., etc." I tried going to the administration about it before, but again she was considered the golden child. They would send someone in to examine her during class. She would act respectful and normal for one day, and go back to being a beach the next. This goes on for about half the year until I had enough. I went to the local Radio Shack, bought a recorder, and secretly recorded every insult she would throw at me. I would sometimes instigate to make up for the lost time. Go ahead, feed the fire. Fast forward to the end of the year and am sitting in Mrs. Frank's class when I ask a question. Her response, and I quote, because it's burned into my brain, was, "I've been teaching here for over 10 years and that was the single dumbest question I've ever heard come from anyone's mouth." She continued the lesson without answering. I calmly stood up, packed up my stuff, and headed to the nurse's office to dismiss myself from school. We were allowed to dismiss ourselves if we were 18. I went home, compiled all of the brutal tapes into one glorious masterpiece, and headed back the next day to show the administrators. I sat down with the principal and we listened to a couple of the insults before he stopped me. He wanted more witnesses present as well as Mrs. Frank's. He told me we would meet the next day where I could show him and the rest of the administrators the full tape. I walk into school the next morning being the most nervous for ever been for anything. I was called down to the office where I met with some board directors, the local school police officer, the principal, the vice principal and Mrs. Franks. What follows was some of the greatest minutes of my life. I watched as the administrators went from fed up with being in another useless meeting, to furious and speechless, with some of them keeping their mouths open for the duration of the tape. I also watched Mrs. Frank go from confident and stuck up, to her realizing that she had effed up beyond repair. She was publicly roasting herself in front of the most important people from the district. The tape ended, and without hesitation, the administrators looked around in astonishment, and the principal turns to me and says, "I think we have heard everything we need to, thank you." And I was quietly dismissed from the room. The final time I saw Mrs. Frank was leaving the room. I looked back and we made eye contact through her tear-filled eyes as I gave the biggest, most evil smile. I returned to class the next week and Mrs. Frank was nowhere to be found. The story spread quickly throughout the school and I was seen as a saint. I had successfully gotten her fired and made it almost impossible for Mrs. Frank to return to her teaching career, as well as cut off most of her connections she had with other teachers in the school. I had ruined her financially because no school district in the area would hire this walking piece of garbage. If you're reading this, Mrs. Frank, I'd like to take this moment to tell you to go F yourself. What's the worst part about dating a Disney adult? My 35F husband, 38M, and I are what you would call Disney adults. We used to work for the parks in college and met there. For us, it has sentimental value as well as being something we both loved from childhood. Now, we are conscious to not be those Disney adults. We can hold conversations outside the movies and parks. We both work well-paying jobs unrelated to the company. We have other hobbies and interests. Our son isn't big on Disney and we're cool with that. It is just something that we enjoy, as well as our daughters. We nurture all of children's hobbies and interests. We also don't blow all our money on this stuff. I know I may sound overly defensive, but we get a lot of comments from people who don't know us well. Anyway, we live in a renovated farmhouse on a bit of land that includes a barn that we finished off, with hopes to make it a guest house one day. In the meanwhile, we've had a relative get married here and it was gorgeous. Now my sister, 28F, wants to get married on our property and we're all for it. Everything's been planned for months and the wedding is in June. It's set to be outside completely, but if it rains, we can move the party into the barn. The only reason a guest would have to go in our house is to use the bathroom. We have 2 on the first floor. The only Disney items are Winnie the Pooh hand towels. I told my sister I'd replace them with regular ones. Wedding space has no Disney items. However, she wants me to take down everything Disney on the first floor of my home. As guests will see, we have a lot of Disney items, pictures, paintings, blankets, Funko Pops, decorations, figurines, dishware, etc. All made for adults and a lot of it subtle or vintage, but you can still tell it's Disney. 1. This would be a massive undertaking. It's not as simple as shoving stuff in a closet. We'd have to pack it up and find a place to store. The sheer amount would require at least 2 hours of packing, not to mention storage and unpacking after. 2. It's ridiculous to me. Who cares if people see? She says it looks tacky and she doesn't want people to remember her wedding for that. I told her no. We're decorating the outside and barn as she wants. We're letting her use our property for free, which she keeps bragging about to friends as it's saving them a ton. When my husband and I stood firm, she whined to our parents who told us to grow up and take it down. Why did you move out from your friend's apartment? I, 22F, live with my best friend and ex-girlfriend, 22FS. Ex and I are friendly and living together has been emotionally tolling but doable. My current lease ends in August. I asked a few guy friends of mine if they'd be interested in taking me in as their third roommate for the next lease period. They agreed and we toured some spots around town. Last week I held a party at the current house and there were people who knew the hosts but didn't know each other. The boys who I was meant to move in with got to the party and immediately start saying the party next door is full of fat Fs and ugly beaches, among a few very disgusting things. Didn't even say hi, just walked in and started saying a bunch of very rude and wrong things about our neighbors. I was embarrassed because they're my friends and I had people I invited that did not know them. I called them out and said something along the lines of "That's enough, you're being an asshole," etc. They proceeded to continue making misogynistic jokes and call me a liberal for the remainder of their time there. The next day I went over to their house and told them I would be living with my ex and best friend instead. They got upset at me saying that we were about to sign the lease and now they have to find an affordable place for just the 2 of them. I told them I didn't feel comfortable living with guys who are very nice and respectful one-on-one, but proceed to become edgy beta males when surrounded by other men. I told them it seemed like I never knew them and that it showed me a side of them I didn't want to live with. Now they're absolutely ballistic about this. They're telling our mutual friends that I definitely am a snowflake, and can't handle a few jokes. I want to point out that a dark joke in good taste at the right moment is hilarious, but there's a difference between dark humor and just straight up being an asshole to people. My friends are split over this. Some say I shouldn't have left them out to dry after saying we would sign a lease together for the past month, and the other half understand why I did what I did. Am I the a-hole for backing out of this lease over how they acted at my party? Am I the a-hole for dropping our dinner on the ground and walking out when my boyfriend asked me what's for dinner tonight, beach? I was over my boyfriend's apartment this weekend and I was cooking dinner because he was studying for exams. I made pasta and a chunky sauce with meatballs and veggies. I told him dinner was ready and he goes, "What's for dinner tonight, BTCH?" with like a lot of emphasis on the last word. I was fed up. I'd had a pretty rough day with work and I have some awfully bad associations with that word being used by other people in my life who were pretty abusive. So I was so irritated that I dropped the pot of pasta sauce I'd been carrying right on the ground and was like, "Well, nothing's for dinner tonight now." And I better not hear you using that word again. It's for the girls. He was freaking out about how sauce had landed on his rug, and he even said, "You're seriously acting like a beach right now." I don't know what else to call it. I just walked out and got takeout for myself and went to my friend's house. She thought it was funny, but my boyfriend was furious. He kept texting and calling and sending me voice memos trying to explain that saying "what's for dinner tonight" BTCH was a TikTok trend. And that he was just quoting something as a joke to put on TikTok. I thought that was the shittiest excuse ever. It doesn't matter if he saw it as a joke, or stole the joke, it was still disrespectful. But it didn't change the fact he thought that shit was funny, to demean me when I was trying to do him a favor. Like hell, I came over when he was studying to make a home-cooked dinner and he decides it's time for jokes. So I put my phone on don't disturb for the night and split a bottle of wine with my friend and her roommate. The next morning he was sending me angry texts demanding I clean his rug because he was too busy with exams to do it. I was shocked he left it overnight. That's disgusting. I texted him back saying, "Yeah, so that's the BTCH tax, honey, smile, leave me alone till you're ready to handle your own cooking and cleaning because this BTCH isn't anymore. Also, it's vile you left that soaking in all night." He called me and told me that he was okay with doing his own household work, but I did throw a full pot of sauce at the ground, so that's on me to clean up. I told him, "Yeah, no, I'm not comfortable doing chores for you if you see me like your BTCH." He told me he didn't and it was just a trend, and I got pissed off. He was playing that TikTok trend BS excuse again, and I told him, "Well, I'm starting a trend called saucing, where as a little joke people throw pasta sauce around. You can't be mad because it's just a little trend, a little jokey joke, just a little prank, bro." He got really pissed off and hung up on me, and now I'm seriously wondering if this dumb effing TikTok joke is gonna be the end of things between us. Am I the a-hole for how I reacted when my boyfriend asked me what's for dinner tonight, beach? Am I the a-hole for kicking out one of my bridesmaids for showing up in the wrong dress? My 23F wedding was back on Saturday, December 31st, and I'm still getting backlash from this, so I want to know if this was an move. In the country I live in, it's currently winter, and we get a fair amount of snow, so my wedding was a winter-themed wedding. The color theme was forest green and gold. My dress was obviously white, and I chose the color of my bridesmaids' dresses to be forest green as well. My MOS dress was black, and everyone was to wear gold accessories. I have this friend, we'll call her Kat, that I asked to be one of my bridesmaids. When we went dress shopping and I told them the color theme I was going for, Kat immediately expressed that she thought forest green was a bad choice. She said that thinks it's not a flattering color, and thought I should choose something different and more girly. I said no because my wedding was winter themed and I thought the color would go perfect with the theme. She suggested a pink, blue, even a red. I said no, but thanks for your opinion. She found out my MOS dress was black and asked if she could wear black too. I said no, only my Mo is wearing black. I paid for all the dresses. Fast forward to wedding day, everyone's getting their hair and makeup done and Kat shows up 30 minutes late holding a bag that looked like it had a dress inside. I asked her what this was for. She told me it was for later on at the reception if she got uncomfortable and wanted to change after pictures. I was like, okay, cool. So fast forward, we're all dressed and walking down the stairs because the ceremony is beginning in 30 minutes and we were going to take some pictures before. Kat is the last person to come down and she's wearing a black dress. At the time I was preoccupied taking pictures with my parents, but my Mo came over to me and made me aware of the situation. I confronted Kat and asked her what was going on. She said she hates her bridesmaid dress, as the color is ugly and makes her look gross, so she's wearing black. I told her please go back and change. She refused and started walking away from me. I said I'm going to ask her one more time, and if she doesn't oblige I'm calling security and kicking her out. She began yelling at me to F off, so I called security and asked them to please escort her out. She started making a big scene yelling how I'm such a bitch, that I can't force her to wear anything and that I'm a horrible inconsiderate friend. The wedding went on and it was truly amazing. Ever since the wedding, Kat has been blowing up my phone with texts saying some really nasty things and asking for the money back she spent on the black dress, since it was a waste and she didn't get to wear it. I had to block her number. Some of my other bridesmaids have been giving me shit saying that it was a little harsh kicking her out and embarrassing her like that. And that maybe I should give her the money back. Ida for kicking her out? How I took down my toxic company. I was working in an organization that was super toxic. So much so that we were a revolving door. Most employees stayed only for a few months. To counter this, our management put a 3 months notice into everyone's contract, including the existing employees. It's not strictly illegal where this happened, but very unusual. I believe the idea behind it was to make it harder for the employees to find a job outside, as potential employers didn't usually want to wait for 3 months. However, this didn't work as most people simply quit and waited for a month or two before starting their job hunt. I was there for almost 4 years. I needed the money, so I put up with whatever abusive shit was thrown at me. My boss was a guy we'll call Vince, not actual name. Now Vince was not particularly good, but he sometimes respected the fact that I was the most tenured grunt in this organization. Do note that after about 2 years, I was doing a lot of additional work in addition to my official responsibilities, primarily because I was the only one who knew how to do those. Everyone else had already left. This will become important later. Enter Rajesh, also not actual name. Rajesh was poached from a somewhat infamous company and was literally flown in from a different continent. He was brought in to strategically improve our division. This was quite strange given that our division generated most profits. Within months, Rajesh made the environment even more toxic. He pulled Vince's team under him and got Vince fired, and he actively encouraged us grunts to spy on each other. Rajesh also had it out for me from day one. Until today I don't know why. He started making my life much harder than the others. This culminated in him taking me aside and telling me that I was not pulling my weight. Now at this point I was doing quite well in the organization, plus I have been doing a lot of additional work critical to our business since only I knew certain systems and processes. See, high attrition above. So I was quite angry. I started looking out. I wasn't still brave enough to quit and start looking. Fortunately I was able to find a job that was willing to wait the 3 months. So it was my turn to take Rajesh aside and tell him I quit. Boy, Rajesh was pissed. He went from denial, "You can't quit," to negotiation, "What if I give you a raise at the year end?" before acceptance. Thus I was serving my notice and working away like an honest bee, my usual work plus the additional work. At this point I was called in by HR and told that Rajesh wanted me gone. The insane part was that they wanted me to pay the company for the 2.5 months shortfall in notice. I obviously refused, then went back and checked the contract. Turns out that a notice of less than 3 months could only happen through mutual consent, and the initiating party, company if they wanted me gone sooner, or me if I wanted to leave earlier, had to compensate the other party for the shortfall. The next day, I stopped doing almost all of my work. I logged in and logged out my hours and did jack shit. I stopped doing any additional work I have been doing, and started taking it really slow on my primary job responsibilities. Since no one else understood the details of what I did, I knew it would be very hard for Rajesh or HR to prove that I was doing any of this on purpose. Then I sat back with my popcorn. Soon there was a complete meltdown all around. Rajesh would pull me into meetings and scream and try to bully me, and I would say nothing but smirk to his face. Next they tried to have someone else learn the additional work I used to do for me so that they could do what I did. Remember I said earlier how I was the only one who knew some of the old systems and processes? Well, now I claimed I didn't really remember any of them. So obviously there could be no handover. Rajesh could do nothing as none of this had been my responsibility or part of my contract, since the leadership had been only too happy to see me do this for free. Soon my workplace turned into a dumpster fire. The HR/Rajesh smartened up and offered to buy out my notice if I cooperated and helped transition my work. I refused. Then, to twist the knife further, I started having meetings with fellow grunts. Remember, everyone was always a newbie, and encouraging them to leave as well, indirectly, nothing that could implicate me. HR tried to get me to leave twice more, but I ended up serving the full 3 months. Remember the mutual consent part? Am I the a-hole for yelling at my girlfriend to stop effing eating? My M26 sister, F23, runs a bakery business and she's been struggling lately to keep up with orders because she's been short-staffed. She does a lot of orders for wedding cakes that require custard or marmalade fillings, and I offered to help her out by making these fillings at home and bringing them to her so she has less work to do. Unfortunately, the past 4 times I've made these fillings, my girlfriend, F24, has literally dipped her fingers into the filling jars and contaminated them because, in her words, she just wanted to try some. I've tried explaining to her that she can't dip her fingers in and contaminate the entire batch, because then I have to remake it. I said she should use a spoon and take some out if she wants to try so bad, but she just pouts and says that she likes using her fingers because it takes her back to her childhood. Today, I was trying to finish some chocolate custard to send it over to my sister really fast because she was running late on a wedding cake order for an important client. I told my girlfriend beforehand to not eat the custard, and if she really wanted to please use a spoon. I get out of the shower, and what do I see? She has her fingers in it again. I totally lost it because this is the 5th time she blatantly disregarded what I said, and I yelled at her and told her to stop effing eating the food I'm making, because it's not for her and she's contaminating it. She started crying and got mad at me for fat shaming her, even though I made no comment on her weight and she has no history of weight issues or eating disorders. I know I was harsh, but she kept pushing my limits. Am I the a-hole? Fiancé left me due to my cancer diagnosis. I left her destitute. This has been 4 years ago, so the sting is gone and my revenge has been had. Sorry, if this isn't the right forum. We dated for 4 years and had what I thought was a great relationship. We were both well-established professionals who both owned homes in the same neighborhood and both with daughters in the home. Her daughter was 11, and mine was 16 when we met. We had actually planned to get married, build a house, and raise the two together. We planned the house build because she had recently been diagnosed with a neurological disease that would eventually put her in a wheelchair, and need something ADA-friendly. During the planning stages, I began doing landscape and construction projects on her home to increase the resale value. All in, I invested roughly $30,000 USD into the home, running everything through my side construction business for tax, permitting, and resale purposes. We had a contract that payment would be made upon the sale of the home. I produced invoices for each and every project, but never pushed for payment because of the prior agreement. Fast forward 6 months, we're looking at property to develop and finalizing drawings on the home when I began feeling ill. I couldn't eat, constantly vomiting and passing blood. I began noticing that my abdomen looked swollen, which was odd because we were both very clean eaters and were in the gym every day. So I went to the doctor and began having tests done. During this time, she began having small cognitive issues, and the stress of her current position was exacerbating her condition, so she took a $20,000 per annum cut in pay along with a lesser position inside the company. After a month or so of different tests, and a biopsy, it came back that I had a golf ball-sized tumor in my stomach, and would need to begin chemotherapy. So I began chemo and radiation treatments, which made me, expectedly so, extremely ill. She was spending time helping around my place on the weekends and staying over more, to the point that they were both at my home, more than theirs. At this point, I suggested that we go ahead and put one of our houses on the market, and move in together until the new house was built. I have great supplemental insurance as well as a long-term illness plan, so using that coupled with the sale of one of our houses would push us through comfortably, and help ease the financial stress on her. Shortly after this discussion, she became extremely distant. Her daughter wasn't coming down and hanging out with mine anymore. She had excuses for not getting together. She quit driving me to treatments and stopped staying over. She then dropped a bomb, a sentence that will forever be burned into my psyche. I love you, but I can't see myself taking care of someone this sick in the long term, and I don't think we should see each other any longer. In a text, it broke me, I won't lie. This was the first woman I had ever opened up to and planned a life with since my wife died when my children were 1 and 3. However, I tried to be mature about it. I forced myself to understand her position and to accept what I could not change. I calmly, the next day, gathered all of her things, packed them neatly, loaded them in my truck, and took them to her house to leave on the back porch while she was at work, in order to avoid any awkward exchanges. Walking around the back and under the porch cover, I sat down a box, and saw her in her back living room, on the couch having intercourse with a man that she had introduced to me as a lifelong friend. I had dinner and drinks with this man and his girlfriend. We had gone on vacation with them, as well. I never spoke of the incident with her, and simply sent her a text later, explaining that I would leave her things on my side porch to pick up at her convenience. I discovered 8 or 9 months later from his now ex-girlfriend, that they had broken up due to him confessing that he had been sleeping with my SO, dating back to about the time we were finishing drawings on the new home. Now I'm pissed. Revenge time. At this point, I had finished chemo and radiation for the time being and was feeling healthier. I was going through some much neglected paperwork when I ran across the file that contained $32,680 in unpaid, long overdue invoices, which were promptly sent to my attorney to begin lien proceedings on the home. It turns out that I couldn't have done this a moment too soon because she was set to put her house on the market. Coupled with interest over the course of, what was then, 19 months overdue, the invoices were hefty. That, along with the agreement of settling them when the house was sold and attorney fees, left her with roughly $10,000 after the sale of the home and settling her current mortgage. She promptly had to back out of the purchase of another home and moved in with her oldest daughter, Sil, and 2 grandchildren. She also had to leave her job and begin receiving disability. I ran into her a little over a year ago, and she looked as if she had aged 20 years, and was in the wheelchair we had talked about. We chatted cordially but briefly and I excused myself and went on with my day. A few days later, her younger daughter called me and spoke of my running into her mom, and could we hang out sometime. I gave a vague answer, thanked her for calling in again, went on with my day. The ex then called me a week or so later, and began apologizing for leaving me as she did. Again, cordial but short, I thanked her for calling and hung up. She began texting and this went on for several weeks until once she asked if I could ever see us rekindling what we had, to which I replied, I can't see myself taking care of someone so sick in the long term. Remember the box on your back porch? Did you think that, lifelong friend, brought that over to you from my house? Good luck to you. Goodbye. My grandmother got revenge on an entire church twice even after she passed. My grandmother was a member of a large conservative Bible-believing church for her entire adult life. This church, which I'll call Big White Church, was a member of a large evangelical denomination. Big White Church was located in a prosperous suburb of a large city in the Bible Belt of the deep south of the USA. Grandma was very active in Big White Church. She worked in the nursery every Sunday morning, helped cook hundreds of church fellowship breakfasts and dinners, accompanied her children and grandchildren on dozens of church retreats and choir tours, taught youth Bible study on Sunday nights and was very active in supporting home missions, as well as helping with other youth programs. She always tithed, and often gave extra for missions and special offerings. Grandma's greatest talent was making other people feel important. I've seen this firsthand many times. Although I belonged to a different church, I often visited with Grandma, and when I did, I usually went to Big White Church functions with her. I've seen her single-handedly cook breakfast for dozens of Big White Church youth, a task which took over 2 hours, even in the church's large kitchen. Then, after the meal, she asked the group for a round of applause for the high school student leader for doing such a great job of organizing the prayer breakfast. I remember that, on a Big White Church youth retreat at a rural church camp, she drove most of the night to go back to the city and retrieve a big box of evangelistic materials that one of the assistant pastors, whom I'll call as pastor, had forgotten and asked her to get in time for our morning program the next day. His boss, the senior pastor, I'll call him pompous pastor, never found out that as pastor had screwed up or that Grandma had fixed it for him. As pastor never even thanked Grandma. Even though I was a child, this bothered me so much that I asked her about it. She said that she didn't mind at all. She told me her reward would be that those materials would help children find Jesus. Grandma's service to her church ended abruptly at the age of 73, when she broke her back in a car accident. Afterwards, for the last 10 years of her life, she was homebound and could not go to church because of this injury and declining health due to old age. Her mind was just as sharp as ever, and her faith remained sincere, but her body wore out a little more every day. During those 10 years, she made many efforts to reach out to her church, its leadership and her church friends, inviting them to visit her at her home, etc., without success. Every one of these invitations was declined or simply ignored. Near the end, when she was in home hospice care, she decided to plan her own funeral. She and my grandpa called her church and asked for the senior pastor, pompous pastor, whom she had known for over 30 years, to visit her so that they could plan her memorial service, which she and grandpa wanted to be held at the church. Pompous pastor was too busy, but as pastor stopped by a few days later. According to my grandpa, here's what happened at that meeting, with my grandma literally on her deathbed. Grandma, grandpa and ass pastor discussed her funeral for a couple of minutes. Then ass pastor started pressuring her to lay up your treasure in heaven by remembering your church and your will. Grandpa told him firmly that this is neither the time nor the place to discuss her will. They went back to discussing the funeral for a few minutes. Then ass pastor steered the conversation back to grandma's will, with liberal injections of how badly her church needed her support. Grandpa told him several times that it was inappropriate to talk to grandma about her will or the church's financial needs, because she was terminally ill and in an enormous amount of physical pain. Ass pastor would agree and briefly talk about the funeral, but would then go back to talking about the church's financial needs, heavenly rewards, where your treasure is your heart will be also, Matthew 6:21, Luke 12:34, etc. My grandma started crying. To put this into context, grandma was more than a steel magnolia. She was titanium coated with diamond wrapped in Kevlar. She rarely ever cried, and never ever cried about herself. Not one tear when the doctor told her that her back was broken so badly that she would never walk again, nor during the following 6 months in futile rehab. She would shed sincere but well-managed tears at funerals and while visiting family members in the hospital when they received bad news. She would cry to console others, weep with those who weep, but nobody, not grandpa, not her daughter, my mom, nor any of my uncles or grandma's siblings, ever remembered her crying for herself. My grandma was sobbing uncontrollably. Grandpa, a retired steelworker, former Marine sergeant and Korean War combat veteran, physically grabbed ass pastor and escorted him out of their house, not too gently. Contrary to everyone's expectations, grandma lived another 6 months, mostly because of sheer force of will. Eventually, though, grandma passed away and we held her memorial service at the funeral home, not Big White Church. Pompous pastor and ass pastor were conspicuously absent. In fact, there were no professional Christians, from Big White Church, at the service at all, not even in the audience. To start the service, grandpa stood up at the podium in front of the crowd and said, "Some of you may have heard that I disinvited pompous pastor and ass pastor from this funeral service. This service is not an appropriate place for me to give you my reasons for doing this, although you all know me and so you know that my reasons are good ones. Also, my wife asked me to exclude them. This funeral service may be different from other funerals that you have attended. It is going to be an open microphone funeral. Everyone who wants to say something is invited to come up here and describe your friendship with my wife, tell a story about her that is worth remembering, or anything else that you want to say that will honor her memory and bring comfort to everyone here today. I have asked several family members to prepare statements, but you don't have to have anything prepared. Please, if you want to say something, come up here and do so." There were about 100 people at the funeral service. At least a third of them eventually stepped up to the microphone. The service, which we had planned to last about 30 minutes, lasted for over 2 hours and, as best I can tell, not one person left early. There was laughing, crying and hugging. 3 of her grandchildren played some of her favorite songs on the piano and guitar. We all joined hands and sang her favorite hymns. Afterwards, dozens of people told my grandpa that it was one of the most comforting and uplifting funerals they had ever attended. More than a few remarked that funerals are better without preachers anyway, or something similar. Remembering her pastors and her church and her will, the 1-2 punch. A couple of weeks later, it was time to start distributing the bequests in grandma's will. Although grandma and grandpa dearly loved each other, they had separate wills because, she told my mom, that makes it easier for us to respect each other's turf, and because their lawyer had recommended it. Nobody thought that my grandparents were wealthy. They had lived in the same small but charming house in a prosperous, well-maintained suburban neighborhood for the past 50+ years, and had worked hard and lived modestly. But it was rumored that they had a very nice nest egg. Of course, there is no legal requirement for anyone to attend the reading of the will, or to even have a reading. Modern telecommunications and near-universal literacy have made this quaint custom practically extinct, but the reading of the will was a tradition in our family because it was one of those events that gave our close-knit, extended family an excuse to get together. We never had family reunions. They were too difficult to schedule for our large family. But we got together at birthdays, holidays, funerals, baptisms, etc., so that if you attended several of these, you would see just about every one of your cousins, aunts, uncles, and even great aunts and uncles who were grandma's and grandpa's siblings and in-laws. With this family tradition in mind, many of our family members' wills often contained very personal bequests of items that had little cash value, but were the departed family members' way of telling their loved ones that they wanted to share a cherished memory with them one last time. As an added incentive to attend, the family rumor mill had been buzzing with speculation, encouraged by grandpa, that grandma's will contain some surprises. The reading was held in a conference room at a lawyer's office. Unsurprisingly, the attendees included my mom, as well as aunts, uncles, great-aunts, great-uncles and many of the grandchildren. We were all surprised, however, to see pompous pastor and ass pastor from Big White Church. They informed us that Grandma's lawyer had told them that Grandma's will had bequests not only for Big White Church, but also for them personally. Maybe it was just our imagination, but my siblings, cousins and I couldn't help noticing that these preachers appeared to be actively salivating over their good fortune at Grandma's generosity. Grandma had a large family, so a sizable number of beneficiaries were named in her will. The lawyer's conference room was a bit smaller than an average middle-class living room. Extra chairs had been brought in, every seat was filled and people were standing in every remaining space. There was barely space for all of us. Grandma's lawyer suggested that pompous pastor and ass pastor sit in chairs which were in the front of the room, next to himself. Since there was a large table in the room, this meant that the lawyer and these two preachers were the only ones who were directly facing everyone else. Although the preachers were gratified to be physically next to the center of attention, they did not notice, as all of the rest of us quickly noticed, that these seats made it easy for everyone else in the room to watch them closely, and practically impossible for them to leave the packed to more than overflowing room before the entire meeting was over, because they were farthest from the room's single door, and there were almost 24 people standing or sitting between them and their only path to escape. The bequests were quite generous, but pretty much what we had expected. Grandpa kept their house, its contents, their retirement accounts and everything that remained after all of the bequests had been satisfied. Children, grandchildren and several local charities received nice, but not extravagant, amounts of money. Several sentimental items were named and given to various friends and relatives. Grandpa was first beneficiary listed in the will, but, after him, all of the other bequests were arranged in order of increasing worth. They started with sentimental items, which had very small cash value. Then each grandchild received several $1,000s. Then each son, daughter, brother, sister, niece and nephew received a little more. Then several local nonprofits received very nice amounts, etc. Bequests to Big White Church, pompous pastor and ass pastor were, almost, the last ones listed in the will. They listened politely to the other bequests, but with steadily growing anticipation, as they noticed the exponential upward trend in Grandma's largesse. When Grandma's lawyer got to the Big White Church and preacher's part of the will, he said, "This is a bit unusual, but before I announce these bequests to Big White Church, pompous pastor and ass pastor, M's, Grandma's name, requested that I read the following statement to everyone present." He opened a letter that was written in Grandma's own handwriting. Find out the crazy conclusion in part 2 posted now. My grandmother got revenge on an entire church twice even after she passed part 2. For the past 10 years, not one person from Big White Church has ever called me, come to visit me or sent me a note to tell me that they cared about me. Not one minister, not one deacon, not one of the church women, not one of the church members who I worked with for all of those years, loved dearly and thought were my friends. I worked very hard for you when you needed me, for many, many years, but when I needed you in your church, you all pretended that I didn't exist. I only got one visit, when I was dying and I invited pompous pastor to come to my house and help me plan my funeral. This was my last attempt, after many attempts that I had made over the past 10 years, to reach out to my church and pastor, whom I still loved dearly even though they had made it clear that they did not love me. If only I could have my funeral at my church, maybe some of my church friends, whom I had not seen in a decade, would come to the service to see me one last time. And I know they love to hear pompous pastor preach, so if he preached at my funeral, maybe they would come to my funeral to hear him, even if they would not have come to see me. But pompous pastor couldn't find the time to visit me, or even call me to tell me whether or not he was willing to preach at my funeral. Pastor came by my house, but he didn't want to talk about my funeral. He just wanted me to remember his church in my will. That's all. Just remember his church in my will. It was then that I realized that I had allowed my church to break my heart for one last time. But that was the last time, the very last time. Pastor did not know it when he visited me, but Grandpa and I had already prepared my will, long before his visit, which did include a double tithe, 20%, of my entire estate, for what was now my former church. Big White Church. This amount was, named the amount, an enormous poopload of money, generating muffled wows from many of her heirs, including me. But I got to feeling badly that we had not personally remembered such nice people as pompous pastor and ass pastor. So I changed my will to include them by name. While I was at it, I changed the amount of money that I left to Big White Church to match all of the love that they have showed to me during the last 10 years of my life, when I was suffering and lonely, and no longer able to work my ass off for them, for free, like I had done for almost half a century. That is her entire written statement, the lawyer said. Now let's get back to the bequests in the will. Bequest to ass pastor, 1 cent. Bequest to pompous pastor, 1 cent. Bequest to Big White Church, 1 cent. The pompous pastor and ass pastor sat there looking like someone had just injected a gallon of Novocaine into their jaws. Every one of Grandma's family and friends felt an overwhelming urge to laugh out loud. But we kept quiet because we knew Grandma. We knew she wasn't finished yet. Grandma was simply setting them up for a 1-2 punch. The best was yet to come, and we didn't want to miss it. There is one last bequest, the lawyer continued, for a charity called, which he named and I'll call Black Charity. Then he paused before naming the amount. Most of us had no idea what Black Charity was, but, by the looks on their faces, we could tell that pompous pastor and ass pastor knew Black Charity very well. Their faces displayed the same expressions of shock, dread and horror that they would have if the lawyer had said, "This bequest goes to the demonic baby eaters to buy extra large rotisserie barbecue grills and tons of charcoal." Every eye in the room was now fixated on pompous pastor and ass pastor. The lawyer, who happened to be my uncle, one of Grandma's and Grandpa's sons, let the silence continue a few seconds more. If we had been able to read pompous pastors' and ass pastors' minds, we would have known the history behind the looks on their faces. Black Charity was sponsored by a large black church just a few miles from Big White Church. They ran a free food/clothing bank, assistance programs for foster children, home delivery of pre-cooked meals for homebound seniors, legal aid, and other social services. A long time ago, Big White Church, which was, and still is 100% Caucasian, had provided a few years of financial and other support to Black Charity. Then there was a very bitter, acrimonious breakup, allegedly because Black Charity was practicing the social gospel, while Big White Church was preaching the true gospel. Big White Church even sued to try to get some of their money back, although the suit was eventually settled and very little money actually changed hands. But, this being the Deep South, everyone knew the real reason why Big White Church, or any white church, would stop supporting a black charity. Those N were getting uppity and not staying in their place. Grandma and Grandpa had seriously considered leaving Big White Church at that time, but they had reasoned that it was better to stay there and teach tolerance by their words and example. They knew they would never persuade everyone, but maybe they could reach some of the youth at their white church and break the generational cycle of racism. Grandma used to tell us, "My church is my mission field." We did not learn the true depth of her statement until after she died. Since then, Grandma and Grandpa had secretly sent a portion of their tithe to Black Charity every month. Most of Grandma's family, including me, didn't find out about any of this until after the meeting had ended. But pompous pastor and ass pastor obviously understood what Grandma, by her actions which are more powerful than words, was saying to them. If you had grown up as a white person in the Deep South, as Grandma, Grandpa, pompous pastor and ass pastor had, you would understand. To many white Southerners, this was one of the most personally insulting things you could do to them. It simultaneously labeled them as racists, condemned their bigotry and crushed their delusions of white superiority by saying, "These black human beings, whom you hate, disrespect and have mistreated, are better people than you are. So they deserve my money more than you do." Having allowed time for everyone to observe pompous pastor and ass pastor while they thought about how their white church had treated this black charity, and how they and their church had treated our Grandma. The lawyer said, "The amount is." Then he named the exact same amount that Grandma had named in her handwritten letter, the huge amount of money that would have gone to Big White Church if she had not changed her will. She hated me and made me think I was an idiot. In high school, 10 plus years ago, I was quiet and attentive in class. Teachers liked me. I wasn't popular, but I had good friends. I say all this to explain that high school was relatively calm for me. I played sports, was on the student newspaper, and got decent grades. However, that all changed my second semester junior year. I've always been a voracious reader. My freshman English teacher recommended I move up to the honors English track, so I did for freshman, sophomore, and the first half of junior year. Then I was put into classical literature my second semester junior year. I've always loved Greek and Roman stories, and had already read your typical high school classical reading list on my own. I didn't mind reading them again until I met Ms. Umbridge. She put on a sweet facade, but she was downright evil. She also decided she hated me. I still do not know why, or what transgression I committed, but she hated me. I assume it was my habit of sometimes nodding off in classes. At the time, I had undiagnosed thyroid issues, and was getting up at 5 a.m. for swim practice. I say sometimes, because it happened maybe twice a month total between all 8 classes. I don't remember nodding off in her class, but it could have happened. Anyways, her class was 50% essays/written reports. The rest were random quizzes and a couple tests. I was on the student newspaper, and I was a decent writer. I wasn't worried about maintaining a B or up. We wrote our first paper, and I got a D. I was shocked. The only class I struggled in was chemistry, and still my lowest assignment grade was a C after class. I asked Ms. Umbridge what I did wrong, because her notes were minimal. She told me my assessment of the material was uninspired. "Okay, can you direct me to an example of an inspired assessment?" Come back during study hall. Thinking she'd have some example materials for me to review, I got a pass to see her during study hall. Nope, she spent the full hour basically telling me I was an idiot. I remember leaving and crying, because she didn't tell me anything constructive. My friend, the eventual valedictorian, offered to help me on my next paper. My friend and I spent hours on my next paper. She never got below an A on anything. I got another D. My friend was furious. She took it to her AP English teacher and asked him to review it. She said she was entering a writing competition and wanted advice. He said it was great. Her typical A+ work. My friend, quicker on the uptake, asked me for a copy of my original assignment. She asked her AP English teacher to look it over too, and he said she should enter the first one. This one was still good. He'd probably give it an A, but the other paper was better. My friend was convinced Ms. Umbridge was treating me unfairly for some reason, and she must not like me. My friend wanted me to tell my parents or my school counselor. A teacher didn't like me? That had never happened. Sure, they didn't all love me, but none had actively disliked me. I decided I'd try one more time, but this time get Ms. Umbridge to help me. Despite the previous horrors of spending study hall with Ms. Umbridge, I went to her office during study hall 3 times before the next paper was due. She reviewed the paper, and gave me tips on revising it each time. She did this in red pen. I took notes. By the time the next paper was due, I had 3 revised versions with her notes in red ink on each one. I got a D+. She smirked and congratulated me on my improvement. Beach. I was done. My friend was right. This beach had it out for me and was giving me poop grades on purpose. I'm a laid-back person, but I was pissed. Never before been this pissed. I took my paper to my newspaper teacher. Sure, he didn't teach English, but our student paper constantly won awards because of his work. I told him I was having trouble in English, and could he please look over my paper and give me advice. He was a little confused as to why I didn't ask my English teacher, but he did it. He also told me it was great, but gave me a few minor changes to make. I asked him if he thought it was a B or better. He said he'd give it an A, not 100%, but a solid A. I went to my friend, and we brainstormed. I couldn't request a drop/add. This wasn't college. You just don't switch classes at my high school, unless the teacher recommends an honor placement. That's not true, said my friend. The football and basketball guys get moved to easier classes all the time to keep their grades up, so they are eligible for games. The athletics director was a friend of my dad, so I requested a meeting with him and my swim coach after school one day. I told them I was in danger of losing my eligibility to swim, because I was pulling a D in a class. I wanted to move classes, but I knew I'd need approval from administration, which I wouldn't get without a good reason. They asked if I had requested help. I explained I had asked for help from multiple people, but my grade wasn't improving. I didn't know what to do. They asked to see my papers. I sat while they read them. They both looked at me confused. Neither of them could understand how those papers were worth only a D. The student VP was brought in. He asked who helped me. I explained my friend. He knew who she was, again future valedictorian, and she had even asked her AP English teacher to look it over for advice. I had also asked my newspaper teacher to help me. Student VP asked if I had ever actually asked my teacher for help. I smiled and handed him the 3 revised versions of paper number 3 with Ms. Umbridge's red ink all over them. He frowned. AP English teacher and my newspaper teacher were pulled into the meeting. They were each asked to grade the papers. All 3 papers got an A or better. While this was going on, my dad was called in by the athletics director. My dad was pissed. He demanded I be moved to another class, and that Ms. Umbridge be put under review. Clearly, she wasn't grading students on their work but on her own personal opinions. The school administration obviously bristled at the accusation that a teacher was treating students unfairly. A lot of arguing that I wasn't allowed to sit on occurred in the VP's office. I could hear plenty of yelling as 6 adult men argued over the appropriate next steps. It was decided that myself, my dad, VP, and athletics director would have a meeting with Ms. Umbridge. The following morning before school we all met. Ms. Umbridge seemed to think she was going to get to tell everyone why I was so stupid. VP explained that if I maintained a D in her class, I would lose my extracurricular eligibility, and we were all meeting to discuss what to do. She smirked and said I should be moved to the non-honors English track, and I had no business being in honors English. I didn't have the aptitude to understand the complex classical literature they were studying, and I probably would need a tutor to even get through basic English. I've never seen my father so red, and I half expected to see steam come out of his ears. VP asked why she didn't try to help me improve. She said it was up to students to put in the initiative to get better. VP asked if that meant I had never asked her for help. She said I had not. VP then pulled out the 3 revised versions of paper number 3 and handed them to Ms. Umbridge. Now it was her turn to be read. She called me a liar and said those notes weren't hers. Things got heated, and I was asked to leave again. I sat outside the office. This time the secretary was there, and we both heard the shouting. School was set to start in 30 minutes, and they were all just shouting. Then AP English teacher and newspaper teacher were called in again. More shouting. About 5 minutes to the start of classes, the teachers left and I was called back in. If looks could destroy lonely, I'd have died then and there when Ms. Umbridge walked out of VP's office. I was being moved to basic English effective immediately. My current grade would not carry over. I would not need to make up any past assignments, and new teacher would be instructed to grade me only on the assignments going forward. My new English teacher, Ms. Honey, ended up being the English department head. She was at least 65, and had been doing this for decades. After 2.5 years of honors English, this class was easier than PE. I barely had to try to get an A, but I refused to let Ms. Honey think Ms. Umbridge had been right. I tried harder in that class than any other class that semester. I finished projects so quickly that I was asked to tutor a girl struggling in the class. I spent half the class period just helping this girl understand the material. I helped her go from a C to a B+. I got something like 104% in the class. At the end of the semester, Ms. Honey called me into her office during study hall. She was recommending I return to honors English for senior year. I must have looked panicked, because she assured me Ms. Umbridge would not be my teacher. In fact, she would not be anyone's teacher. She was leaving at the end of the school year. Ms. Umbridge was only in her late 20s and unmarried, too early to retire, and my high school was in one of the best paying school districts in the state. I knew what leaving meant, but Ms. Honey still explained that I was put in her class on purpose. The school administration trusted Ms. Honey to determine the truth of Ms. Umbridge's claim that I was basically a lying idiot. Ms. Honey stated I very clearly belonged in honors English. She apologized if her class had not been challenging enough for me. I cried. I mean full on ugly, snot cried. I didn't realize it, but part of me had actually believed Ms. Umbridge up until that moment. Ms. Honey hugged me and consoled me. I spent senior year in honors English and spent my study hall tutoring Ms. Honey's struggling students. To this day, I think about that awful woman fairly regularly. My career is strongly writing based, and I still worry obsessively over my writing. I hope she never taught again, because she wreaked havoc on my self-confidence. My mother refuses to give me back my 9-month-old son. As stated in the title, my mother is outright refusing to give me back my son. To keep it short, she offered to watching him for a few days while I was sorting out a move across states. FL to TX, the move came around sooner than expected and all hell broke loose. It's been a nightmare since my pregnancy, but I digress. I'm not currently in FL, I'm in TX sorting things out. My husband is down in FL though, so I had asked him to pick up our son from my mom's. For more than one reason, one being my mom is a narcissist and she had been calling me with really concerning behavior. She then refused to hand him to my husband, reasons being we are making a mistake, don't take him from me, you're horrible parents, I do not want my son to be there. The cops were called and they informed us that they couldn't do anything because it wasn't their department, so they couldn't just grab my son and hand him over. Is that really it? What can I do to get my son back if the cops won't do anything? They told me we could take it up with family court, but we will 1, not be able to afford that, and 2, not be able to stay in FL for a case to begin with. My son only 9 months old, I really don't want to have to put him through that. Is there any other possible way to proceed? I have goodish news. My son is back home. I landed in Florida at around 12 a.m. I wanted to go straight to my mother's house and grab my son, but many advised against it, so I waited anxiously till later in the day. Before getting there, she called me on the phone. I tried to get her to message me instead, but she refused and talked over me. She informed me that she was going to give me my son, but to not be too happy. She said she is going to call the courts on Monday to tell them that my son was going to be unsafe. She is hard set on believing something terrible will happen to him in our care. I'm not sure why. When we picked up our son, all of his things were ready, as I requested it, so I was glad. One of my sisters was recording. I am thankful she was, because you can clearly hear my stepfather hurl insults and threats at us in the background. The whole time my family kept giving us dirty looks. My middle sister even threw some of the items at my husband. We left quickly after that, very little words exchanged. My family soon messaged me after trying to make me feel bad for making my mother cry. They sure weren't worried when I was crying over my son practically being held hostage. I'm trying to prepare myself for a possible CPS visit. All stuff is packed away in boxes, so I'm not sure if that's okay or how it'll work out. By the time we got home, it was too late to call the sheriff's office, so I'll be calling in the morning to file a restraining order against my mother and stepfather. My husband also wants to sue them for essentially kidnapping our son, but we're still in the process of dealing with everything else. I'd like to thank everyone who gave me advice on how to deal with the situation, and all the good wishes were greatly appreciated. It really helped me keep a leveled head. A few things I should have probably mentioned in my original post. We're people of color. I feel like you'll be able to understand what I mean. My parents also don't speak English very well. My husband is biologically and legally my son's father. My mother has zero custody of my son, and neither does my stepfather. These were common things that got brought up in the comments, so I just wanted to clarify. We still have 6 days left in FL. A lot of things could happen in that time period. My mother has no evidence whatsoever to back her claims though, so I'm not extremely worried, just nervous. I wish I could understand what's driving her to act this way, but talking to her is near impossible. 15 years ago, my, then 18F, best friend, 18F, got pregnant by my boyfriend, 20M, of 3 years, and my family knew about it but didn't tell me, so I ran from home. Now we are back in contact after 15 years and my, 33F, mom, 59F, demands I mend my relationship with the ex-BF and ex-BFF. When I was 18 and in my senior year of high school, I really believed my life was on a good track. I lived with my parents and 4 siblings, 23M, 22M, 20F, 14F, and spent most of my days hanging out with my best friend Ashley, 18F, and my boyfriend of 3 years Kyle, 20M. Both Ashley's and Kyle's parents were best friends with my parent, so I knew both of them since we were in diapers. We spent holidays together, birthdays, and visited each other all the time as we lived in the same town. Ashley's been my friend for 18 years and she truly was the person I trusted with everything. Sometimes our parents would joke that we are connected by the hip as we were together all the time. I've been dating Kyle for the last 3 years. I believed he was the love of my life and the one I would eventually marry. We were quite serious and even talked about getting married after he finished college. He was a sophomore at that point. Although I had every plan on going to university, I was quite content with the idea of being married to Kyle and being a stay-at-home mom. My parents loved Kyle and supported our relationship. I really was happy. I think I should note here that my sister 20F was also dating Kyle's brother 23M and that all our siblings were very close. One day, at the beginning of the school year, I noticed that Ashley was being very melancholic and detached. After a while of prodding, she told me she was pregnant. I was very surprised because I didn't know she and her boyfriend broke up a while ago, and I didn't know she had anyone else like that in her life. I asked her who the father was and she didn't want to talk about it, but in a way implied that the ex was the father. She was absolutely distraught, so I dropped the topic and just consoled her. I was with her when she told her family, and while her parents were disappointed, they promised to support her in whatever she decides. They tried to make her share the dad's name, but she refused and made me promise to stay quiet. They did not know she had a boyfriend at one point. I was there for her for the next 9 months. I went with her for an ultrasound, doc's appointments. I was there for her when she was bullied in school for being pregnant. I helped her set up the nursery. I was there when she was sick or just felt down. I held a baby shower for her, went shopping with her. I even took some parenting classes with her. We chose names together and she even asked me to be with her in the delivery room. I noticed that the pregnancy was really taking a toll on her emotionally and physically, and I tried to support her in every way possible. She was my best friend, always there for me, and I loved her. Some 2 weeks before her due date, I went to the mall to run some errands and ran into her ex. Although I promised never to contact her, the knowledge of my friend's emotional state sent me into a fit of anger and I confronted him. I gave him a piece of my mind, told him what a piece of shit he was for leaving his ex pregnant and alone and not caring for his unborn child. He was shocked and said that he had no idea what I was talking about. Ashley never told him about the pregnancy, and when I told him she was 9 months pregnant at the time, he said that it was not possible for him to be the father as they broke up over a year ago and had no relation since then. I was confused but apologized for yelling at him in the middle of the mall. After that, he became snarky, said some nasty stuff, and mentioned that maybe I should ask Ashley's friend Kyle if he is the daddy. I didn't really think about his words in any way. Kyle and Ashley have been friends their entire lives. We were always very close, because of our parents' relationship, but they never showed any sign of being anything more. That evening my younger sister, 14F, and I were preparing to have a movie night. I began ranting to her about confronting Ashley's ex and his words. My sister, who is usually very outspoken, got quiet and didn't really respond to anything I said. After a while, she excused herself and went to the bathroom. I decided to go and get some snack and went downstairs to the kitchen and heard younger sister berating my mother. This part of my memory is really fuzzy as I was dealing with lots of emotions. My sister told my mom about me running into Ashley's ex and his words and told my mom she no longer wanted to hide from me the fact that Kyle was Ashley's baby's father. I was shocked, absolutely shocked. I stumbled into the kitchen and demanded an explanation. Both my mom and my sister became white as a sheet when they saw me, and my sister started crying her eyes out. My sister explained to me some things I also learned from other people later that appeared during the end of the summer break. Kyle and Ashley attended the same house party, got influenced, and slept together. Ashley got pregnant and told Kyle, but they were both ashamed and afraid of telling me. They also didn't share this with their parents. Ashley, however, couldn't keep the secret and told her mom and dad, who told Kyle's parents and later to mine as well. This all happened when Ashley was in her first trimester. By her second trimester, all of my siblings, Kyle's and Ashley's siblings, knew about this. Everyone, except for me. I simply cannot explain the way I felt. I was physically ill for the next 3 days and I couldn't speak to anyone. My parents were apologetic but explained that they didn't want to see me hurt or ruin everyone's relationship. I did not speak with Kyle or Ashley, although they bombarded my phone with messages and calls and also came to my house. I refused to see them. At one point Kyle's mom came to our house and my mom allowed her into my room. While I was lying in my bed still ill and just emotionally drained from the betrayal, she tried to convince me to forgive them and how Ashley and the baby need me. I said nothing. 2 weeks later Ashley went into labor. I learned from my parents that she had a hard delivery, she lost a lot of blood and needed an emergency C-section. Kyle apparently was at the birth. I was distraught, inconsolable. Because of the betrayal by both, because I planned to be there and now physically and emotionally couldn't, because I was looking forward to this moment for months. So many reasons. My older sister immediately went to the hospital to be with her boyfriend. My other siblings weren't at home, so I was left alone with my parents. All I wanted was to lay in my bed or cuddle in my bed with my mom and cry all my feelings out. My mom received a call from Ashley's mom. She came to my room and told me that she and dad were going to the hospital. I was perplexed and asked her to stay with me. She said that Ashley's parents need all the support they can get and that we will discuss everything later. I tried to tell her not to go and that I also need their support, but she said not to be selfish and they left. I was left alone at the house and I just couldn't comprehend what happened in the last few weeks. I couldn't believe that my parent would go and support someone who hurt me so much, while I was also here suffering. Am I really selfish to think like that? Check out part 2 now. After 18 years of marriage, I just found out that my children aren't mine. My wife Kelly and I have known each other for over 20 years and have been married for 18 years. We have 17-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, and I found out that they aren't mine 2 days ago. My kids got those ancestry tests for the family and we found out that I am not their father. Kelly and I met each other as co-workers at a job right out of college. We both were very ambitious, so after working for a couple of years, we decided to start our own business. We fell in love, and a year after starting out business, we got married. A couple of months into marriage, we had a massive fight over the direction we wanted to take our business in, and I left our home. She came to me a couple of weeks later, and we compromised. We've been inseparable ever since. Kelly got pregnant around that time. We've been through thick and thin. Our business has been through several hardships, but we weathered them together. We were always there for each other. We could always depend on each other. I loved her so much. She was a part of me and I couldn't even imagine a life without her. I trusted her absolutely until this happened. Kelly has been crying and apologizing constantly. She told me that during the time we had that fight at the start of our marriage, she got influenced one night and slept with a random guy, and that she has not cheated on me since. The betrayal has left me disoriented. I told Kelly I needed time to process this and I'm currently staying at a hotel. I don't know what I'm even doing anymore. The last 2 days have been a blur. I feel like a zombie, completely unable to feel or process anything. I don't intend to abandon my kids. I might not be their father, but I'm still their dad and I love them dearly. Right now, I'm sitting on my hotel bed and I have not eaten anything today. My thoughts are a mess, so I'm writing this down to help me process. Kelly has always been a great wife and an excellent business partner. I don't know if I'll be able to look at her the same again or if I'll be the same person again. I don't know how to move forward. The day after my post, I called my children and told them I love them. They were scared that I might leave them. I told them that they're still my children even though I'm not their biological father and that I won't be abandoning them. I just needed to think about my relationship with their mother. I saw several comments telling me that they're not my children because they don't have my DNA, but it matters very little to me. I raised them and they're my children. I spent thinking about how to move forward with Kelly after that. I was angry that she hid the fact that she slept with someone else after we got married. I calmed down and really thought about the whole situation. I really wanted to call my lawyer to talk about separation, but I kept thinking about our life together, so I decided to talk to Kelly and give her a chance. I called her and went back home the next day. My kids were thrilled to see me and we spent some time together. Kelly and I went up to our room after that. I didn't speak to her properly since we saw the results. I gave her time to talk. Kelly told me that it had never even occurred to her that the kids couldn't be mine. She told me that when we had the fight early in our marriage, she was angry at me leaving over a business dispute, and after waiting for me to return, she went to a bar one day and got wasted. She picked up some guy and didn't remember much that happened that night. The guy was gone before she woke up the next day and she felt extremely guilty after that. She wanted to tell me but was afraid that I would leave her. To be fair, I was a hot-headed and stubborn guy back then, so I probably would have filed for a divorce without a second thought. To her, it was influence and a mistake that would never come out, so she didn't want to risk our marriage, and I would have never found out about it if she didn't get pregnant that night. She broke down multiple times and apologized constantly throughout the conversation. I believe her story. Kelly has been my rock and partner throughout my life, and I wouldn't be where I am today without her. We trusted each other absolutely. This ordeal has made a massive dent in my belief in her as a wife, but I still trust her as a partner. We had long conversations about our future and I told her I was willing to give us a chance. I made it clear that we might not succeed and I might leave, but I was willing to try. I assured my children that no matter what happened with my marriage, I would always love them and be their father. We decided to give marriage counseling a try. My wife asked a therapist friend of hers and she recommended a counselor. We have appointments starting next week. Parents whose children ran away from home. Did you realize your mistakes? Did you change? I, 45F, have a son from my previous marriage. I got pregnant way too young at the age of 20 from my high school sweetheart, David, 45M. We got married at the age of 22 after we graduated college. David was rich. He didn't want me to work, so I was just a housewife. My son was the apple of my eye. I gave everything to him. He was my world. He and I were really close and I never had a doubt in my mind that I would not be alone in this world as long as I have him. That is until 10 years ago. I found out that my husband was cheating on me with a young colleague of his. And what is worse, my 15-year-old son knew about it. He hid the affair from me. Imagine how broken I was. I was betrayed by two people I care most in this world. I asked him why he did that, why he hurt me. His response was that his dad told him not to. He bought him gifts to keep his mouth shut, and having a young stepmom made him popular amongst kids. I was totally blindsided when I learned my husband took my little boy to meet that woman. They made excuses that they went on a ski trip and they took his mistress with them. I felt like a fool at that time. In the divorce ruling, my son chose my ex over me. I was heartbroken. My son didn't even want to visit me after it was all done. I even tried to reach out to him once he turned 18, but he just refused. At that point I gave up and went on with my life. I would still get sad over the years wondering how he was doing. I did move on and met someone who was a single father of 2 girls. I married him, and few days after our wedding I got pregnant again. The pregnancy was a nightmare. I wanted to meet my son and tell him he is going to be a brother to a baby girl. The labor was painful. I almost died on the spot after giving birth to my daughter. I still wanted to meet my son, but I knew he did not want to see me, so I just gave up the idea. Over the years, the memories of him just became vague as I immersed myself into my new family. A week ago, I got a series of messages from him on my Facebook. He said that he missed me a lot and wants to meet up with me. It took me by surprise. Over the last 10 years he has not contacted me. Now he wants to see me? Why? I have been going over every possible reason. The worst part is that I do not feel excited about it. As a mother I know I should be over the moon, but I am not. My parents and husband know that. They have been pushing me to meet him. They say I need closure, after all he is my son. But I don't know if I want to relive the same trauma, so am I wrong? Check out part 2 posted now. Parents whose children ran away from home. Did you realize your mistakes? Did you change? Part 2. A lot of you have been requesting me for an update. I finally met my son after so many years. He was not a boy anymore. He was a man. He looked taller than I remember. So anyways, I will give an update. I read your comments. Some of you gave me some good suggestions. I prepared myself for any possible outcome. He could be there to meet me and tell me about his life, or maybe reconcile. Or maybe he wants something. Regardless of what it is, I am keeping my guards up. I asked him to meet me in a public park. I asked my husband to be somewhere near so he could see me. My son came 5 minutes after I arrived. He was all grown up. I won't lie, I wanted to cry at that spot but held my composure. He said hi to me and I smiled. I commented that he has grown up and looks really nice. He just nodded. We sat down and it was silent. I was expecting him to say something at first, but I finally asked what he was up to these days. He told me he is doing fine. He just finished college and is going to apply for grad school. I said that is great. Then it was awkward silence again. He broke the silence and said, "You must be wondering why I contacted you." I replied, "For 10 years you haven't tried to contact me, but why now? I cannot help but wonder why you're trying to contact me when you told me years ago you don't want me near you because I embarrass you." His face got serious and he said, "I know that, but I need something from you. A lot of you suggested he must be here to ask me for money. Well, you guys were right. He asked me for money and the amount was 20K. He said he needed the money because he wants to go to law school and his father can't afford it because he lost a lot of his money a few years ago due to a loss on his business and his company was bankrupt. He also had 3 more kids with his mistress wife. That's why they do not have money for him to go to grad school. It just sank my heart. After 10 years I was finally meeting him. I was hoping that we could reconcile and he would understand what I have been through, or maybe my husband was lying to him. But no, he just wants money from me. I told him I cannot give him money, not such a huge amount. He got defensive and kept saying why not, and then he asked, is this about Dad's affair? Geez, when will you get over it? I asked him, why do you hate me? What have I done to deserve your hatred? Have I ever raised my voice? Have I ever hit you or said no to you? Then why? You always pushed me away when I tried to get closer to you? Why, and what did I do to deserve it? He took a deep breath and said, you don't understand, Mom. You really expected me to come with you? You had nothing. At least my dad could afford the lifestyle I wanted, and my friends actually liked Carla, his stepmom. Everything was fine until you discovered his affair and my deal with Dad. I get it, you didn't hit me or scold me, but you were not able to afford the life I wanted. I asked him if he really thinks his father's affair was actually the best way for any of us. I sacrificed a lot for him, and yet he chose someone who he only met when he was 14. He said he doesn't want to talk about that because it was so many years ago and I should just drop it. I asked him why didn't he ever try to visit me. I even asked if it was his dad who tried to stop him or any other reason, or is it something I did. I tried to reach out to him multiple times, but he never answered or tried to be there. I gave him space because I thought he was coping with the divorce too. He yelled at me that I was really annoying. His dad didn't stop him. It was he who didn't want to meet me because I lived in a small apartment with only 2 bedrooms. He hated living in a place like that. And he ignored me on his 18th birthday because the gift I had for him was pretty cheap and stale compared to what his dad and other people gave him. I agree. My gift was a box of his favorite cookies and an old vintage watch. I was struggling a lot at that time, so I couldn't afford to buy him expensive stuff. But does that mean he should have ignored me like that? I had enough of it. I told him strictly that I will not be giving him money. I have spent years wondering where he is and how he is doing. He is still very disrespectful towards me. Throughout our whole conversation he didn't even ask how I was. He just went straight to money. I was here hoping that we could move on. He had no idea how much of a mess I was when I learned the man I loved so much would betray me, and then my own son would lie to me for him. I thought we had a special bond. My head has been going through a lot of conclusions. Maybe his dad was lying to him about me. Maybe he was mad about something I did. But now I have the picture. I do not want to be his ATM. I wanted to be his mother even when he rejected me. I'm tired of feeling rejected and getting mistreated and taken for granted. He kept saying and getting even more defensive that I cannot do this to him. I am ruining his life. I told him no. I cannot trust him to give so much money. He told me to cut the BS because he knew I have money now, I can easily give him some. I told him no again and again. He at one point stood up and blamed me and screaming that I am ruining his life, that I owe it to him. I called my husband and he rushed towards me to keep my son away from me. I know now I should have trusted my instincts. I cried a lot when I came home. I lost him forever. I know a lot of you will call me a bad mother. You will call me a narcissist. But I am sorry. I have spent a lot of time in therapy to get over the pain of losing my husband and son. I cannot have him in my life only to be used as an ATM. Even if I gave him the money, there is no guarantee that after getting the money he will not ghost me or push me away, and then when the money runs out he will come to me again to ask for more. I cannot go through the similar pain. I may be able to forgive him for what he said to me, but I don't think I will ever forget what he said. He hated me because I had no money. I would have been fine with weekly visits from him, but he never even wanted that. Additionally, I discovered during our conversation that he was the first one to find out that my husband was having an affair, and he asked his dad to buy him a new phone in exchange for not telling me. I lost. That's all I have as an update. I am sorry if there were any mistakes. It is hard to write and form sentences and put all of it in a few words. And no, his birthday was not the only time I reached out like many of you assumed. I tried to reach out to him before that many times. He said he didn't want to or had other excuses. I respected his decision and didn't bother him much. I finally gave up trying when he was 18, but I still checked his social media for quite a while until I gave that up too. I got back at childhood bullies by destroying an entire town. Pardon for my English as it isn't my first language. I was browsing r/askreddit and came across a thread about whatever happened to that trenchcoat kid at your school. I was that trenchcoat kid and I came back in town and destroyed it, years ago. As a background, I grew up in a conservative little town in a conservative rural area heavily dominated by religion. This makes people put great stock on moral purity and appearances. Keeping up the facade is the most important thing. Everyone must go to church weekly and people are heavily judged for appearing sinful. This was a bad thing for me as the cards were heavily stacked against me from birth. You see, I'm an assault baby. My mother lost her parents when she was young and was taken in by her uncle and aunt. The uncle had an important position in the local religious hierarchy, so when he and a couple of his friends started essaying my mom, it was ignored by everyone. When she got pregnant, it was painted at showing that she's a harlot running around seducing married men. She was cast out. Why she didn't move out of town, I don't know, but yeah, there I became into the picture, born out of wedlock and with no father, branded as a sinful outcast. My childhood was poop. I don't go into details, but enough to say that by the time I started going to school, I was quite damaged. School made it worse. I was bullied relentlessly. Teachers were part of it, since they were all part of the religious community, which saw me as stained. Imagine being the only black kid in a town run by KKK and you get close to how it was. So yeah, in school I became the trenchcoat kid or its local cultural equivalent. I became weird and hostile on purpose to turn people off. People were casting me into the mold of being damaged and stained, so yeah, I took it and turned it into something to protect myself with. Despite all this opposition, I managed to graduate with decent grades. A distant aunt, my only decent relative, helped me get into a college in an actual city. She was the black sheep of the family and saw herself in me, maybe. Around this time my mother drank herself to death. Can't blame her for it. She had a life insurance policy that helped me study. City life liberated me. I went into therapy and managed to treat the wounds that town had sliced into me. I got rid of that poopty town, but I guess some part of it never left me. Years went by. I became a sort of analytical consultant. I work for an international company that does sort of out-of-the-box analysis for other companies. I won't go into details to protect my identity, but we assist in solving all kinds of situations. Well, in my line of work, I'm sometimes called in to help downsizing operations. This sucks. I feel for the people who get fired, but if I wouldn't do it, someone else would. A couple of years ago I got an assignment to go into 3 different factories and assess them wholesale, then come with a suggestion on which of them to move abroad. My hometown was among those 3 factories. You see, the poopty town I grew up in was one of those one smokestack towns like we say in my country. There was one factory and some agriculture. Everyone worked in those jobs, like 60% of people in the factory. Rest of the economy rolled around supporting the factory and the people working there. Most of the people were looking forward at nothing but a job at the factory after getting out of school. The religious community running the town ran the factory as well. The big shots in the community tended to be bosses in the factory. This meant that the factory wasn't run that well. Promotions were based on holiness, not on merit or skill. The trip back to the hometown was glorious. Most people didn't recognize me at first. The chubby outcast had become outwards just another corporate drone. I inspected all the paperwork, listened all their speeches and lies, audited the processes. In the process I dropped hints and finally they got who I was. The factory people threw a party for me then for the old time's sake. Many of my old school buddies were there. We remembered fake good times together. I threw shadow on every part by pulling up some certain event of bullying I had endured. Just see the atmosphere turn awkward. Then I laughed at it like it was always a joke and I had grown out of it. Inside I was seething with hatred and enjoying this all. I really loved seeing their faces, seeing what they had become, because F it, I was going to take it all away from them. In the end they seemed relieved, believing that they were lucky it was me doing the audit, that the hometown boy would protect them. After my visit, lasting a couple of days, was over I cruised around the town in my rented car, just to see how the people lived and to remember what it was like. My state of mind was something close to intimate arousal. I had never understood why people pursue positions of power, but yeah, now I understood. The rest is, as they say, history. I wrote a really scathing report, documenting every little flaw and mistake ever done in the town plant. I didn't need to lie or fabricate, I simply took things that existed and polished them till they looked even worse than they were. The factory was shut down and in the following 3 years, the town died. No business venture ever came to replace it. Substance use and alcohol use spiked, as did crime and domestic violence. Lives fell apart, families fell apart. They still haven't recovered, save for a few brighter souls who moved away. I still stalk them on social media sometimes, enjoying how poopty their lives are, how they all finally got to pay for what they did to me and my mom. I don't feel a slight bit of remorse. If I could do it all again I would, only I'd first make it so I could be present to watch when they receive the news about the factory being shut down. Hell, in my fantasy version of the events, I'd stay in town for a year just to see everyone fall apart. In reality, I will only go there back once. When my uncle finally dies, I'm going to go and piss on his grave. Evil stepfather gets what he deserves. When I was 15, my mom started dating a man she met on a dating website. I didn't like him the first time I met him and 2 months later he moved into the house. About 3 weeks after he moved in, he took my skateboards, self-built halfpipe, ramps, BMX bike, ice hockey gear, and many other things to the dump one day while I was at school. He said he did this because he didn't want all of my crap cluttering up his garage. Maybe 2 months later he punched me in the stomach for the first time because I got up from the dinner table without asking to be excused. From there it escalated into full-fledged beatdowns for the smallest perceived slight to his authority. One day he decided to take my extensive Pokemon card collection, even more extensive comic book collection, my Game Boy and PS2 with all the assorted games, and my fantasy and sci-fi book collection and got rid of it all because 15-year-old boys should be playing football and baseball, not being a nerd playing with Pokemon cards and reading comics and books. I would like to add that he was a middle school teacher, and in his off time refereed and umpired local middle and high school sports games. My mom never intervened, and in fact acquiesced when he demanded that she stop giving me lunch money, because the little poop will just spend it on comics and other gay poop. One day, I took maybe $3 and change out of his change jar so that I could buy a slice of pizza and some fruit punch during lunch at school, because I was tired of being hungry. My twin sister was always a bit of an asshole, and frequently blackmailed me into doing her chores from a young age. I was fed up and refused to do something, so she told him what I had done. This man actually called the police and pressed a larceny charge against me, and once the police had left, proceeded to beat me senseless. At that point I ran away. When the cops found me and returned me to my home, I found out that he had been trying to talk my mom into sending me away to military school or something of that nature. I ran away again, and between having run away several times and the larceny charge ended up turning 16 in juvenile detention. I spent the next couple years miserable and afraid, frequently contemplating sewer slide. Once I was out on my own, I didn't speak to my mom for several years. We eventually reconciled, and by that point they had married. I was a lot bigger than I had been as a young teenager, and had gotten into weightlifting, so he no longer acted like he was going to punch me to make me flinch, much less actually hit me, and we basically avoided each other for the most part. My mother found out that she had stage 4 cancer, and no longer wanted to waste any of the time she had left with him, so she had a lawyer draft up a separation agreement whereby he would receive a set amount of money upon separation, and would have 45 days to retrieve his belongings from the house. He had spent his entire inheritance in 6 months and then had to sell his mother's house that he grew up in order to settle his debts shortly before they started dating, and my mother bought the house back from the bank before they married. She allowed him to keep the house and he moved back into his mother's house. My mother passed away about 9 months after their separation, and despite the agreement had been allowing him to come and get his stuff piecemeal. I put an immediate end to that. He was past the deadline to remove his personal effects and they were now legally mine to dispose of as I saw fit. I sold his baseball card collection, around $14,000, and his autographed sports memorabilia, roughly $11,000, and also sold all of his woodworking equipment, along with several finished pieces of furniture that he had made, $6,500 I think. I kept his mother's engagement ring, platinum band 3 diamonds roughly 2 carats, wedding band, his coin collection, I also collect coins, and some tools and other odds and ends. Now comes the real fun. Around a month ago I finally saw him at the grocery store. As he was leaving I approached him. I told him I had sold his collections as he was pushing his cart out towards his car. He reacted exactly as I expected. He took a swing at me multiple times. I already had my phone ready to dial 911. Several of these punches missed, and the ones that did connect didn't have much effect because he's nowhere near as strong as he was 20 years ago in his 40s, and I'm no longer a skinny little 15-year-old. He continued to try to punch me as I spoke to the 911 operator, and was actively ramming his grocery cart into my new Toyota as the police officers pulled into the parking lot. He was arrested for assault, communicating threats, and destruction of property. As a result he lost his job, and pension, at the local middle school, and because he had never learned how to save money while married to my somewhat wealthy mother ended up having to sell his mother's house because he hired an expensive lawyer thinking he could somehow beat the charges. My nephew, who was on the football team, made it well known to his friends that he not only had just been arrested and convicted of assault as well as other charges, but that he had also beat me as a child, causing several parents to call for him to resign from refereeing and umpiring for local sports games. My niece, and my girlfriend's much younger sister are enrolled at the middle school where he worked, and say that he was not only universally disliked, but when he came up to the school to get his belongings, he made a big scene and ended up hysterically crying as he was leaving. At least that's what they've heard from the kids who were attending summer school at the time. His son, who he was equally abusive towards as a child, refused to take him in or help him out, so the abusive stepfather ended up having to take a job as a cashier at Walmart so that he could afford the rent on his crappy little trailer in an absolutely awful neighborhood. Even though that Walmart is not the closest Walmart to my house, that is now the only place where I go grocery shopping or to purchase anything that I need. I purposely stand in line longer than I need to just so that he can be the one who has the pleasure of ringing up my purchases. The first time I went through his line he attempted to ring up multiple items more than one time to overcharge me, and when I called him on it, he said that I was mistaken. I asked for a manager, and the manager believed him that it was an accident, but he learned that he can't get away with that. The second time, I made sure to be as nice as possible and had to ask for a manager because he was overwhelmingly rude. The people in line behind me backed me up and he got in some trouble for that. Every time I go there and step into line, I see him die a little bit inside, and it gives me such satisfaction. Sometimes I'll say that I'm paying with exact change, and as I'm about to hand him the money I'll say, "Oh, I didn't realize I had rare coin from his collection in my pocket. I guess I'll use my credit card. I just sold his expensive ratcheting wrench set, and so on Monday when he works again I'm going to go buy my daughter one of their better above ground pools, and as he's ringing it out tell him I know that daughter is just going to love this pool. It's not like I would have ever used those expensive ratcheting wrenches anyway. All you can eat employees, what is the most disgusting display of gluttony you have witnessed? Been working in a Chinese buffet for 6 years, here are my best ones. Kid putting chocolate pudding in his plate, licked the big spoon used for pouring it, the one used by everybody, and put it back in the pudding. I saw him and had to change everything. Guy about 18 years old at the ice cream counter, didn't have time to react and puked in the ice cream cans and on the floor, looked at it, said nothing, and just walked away back to his table. Drunk dudes coming at around 6 p.m., they ate full plates in like 20 minutes, and puked everything under their table. We had to move every client out of this big section, capacity of about 60 places, because the smell was so bad. I was the one that had to put a mask on to clean everything. Extremely fat guy brought a big bag of candies, kind of Smarties, took it out of his pocket, put a shit ton of M on his desserts, and put the candy bag back in his pocket. I was his waiter and I think he told me about 4 times that we should have these candies in the buffet so he wouldn't have to bring his own. Old lady putting a plate full of chicken wings in her purse, probably to bring back home or something. No bags, nothing, just bare chicken wings directly in there. A regular client asking me where was the coffee-flavored cake. We have a rotation for desserts, so that cake wasn't there that day. I told him and he asked me if I could get some for him in the back store. After he insisted like 3 times, I finally gave up and grabbed a piece in the fridge and gave him. We charge the drink, $2.50, but it's all you can drink. We see plenty of people drinking about 10 full glasses of Pepsi and they complain when I bring the bill and we charge them $2.50 for it. Some even insisted to talk to my manager. We serve takeouts, and someone came to get his order. He looked at the buffet and asked me, "Do you think I could grab something to eat real quick?" While smiling, we often get this asked as a joke, so naturally I played their game and answered yes, of course. The guy literally walked over there, took an entire egg from our salad bar, ate it in one bite, then came back to pay his takeout. I had no idea what to say, and he just left like that. What did your teacher do that you didn't realize until you were older was fed up? In kindergarten we had this mousy sissy spacek looking teacher who had it as policy that every kid who came into class first thing in the morning had to kiss her on the cheek. I don't even remember if I did or didn't do it that morning. I know that another kid and I in that class looked very similar. It could have been him that didn't kiss her, or it could have been me because I don't really remember. Anyways, I was sitting in class with my back to the teacher. We had large round tables with maybe 4 kids per table, when class started and she called me out publicly in front of the class that I hadn't kissed her. I was an extremely shy child and this was the worst thing that could have happened. The whole class's attention focused on me. I basically froze and ignored her order for me to come up to her and kiss her in front of the class. I had my legs/feet wrapped around the legs of the chair I was sitting in. She got mad, stormed over to me and tried to yank me out of the chair. The chair went with me and then flew for me to loudly clatter across the floor and I freaked out, bawling, screaming, etc. etc. She realized she effed up big time and backed off as I continued to cry. Fast food workers, what is your sir? This is a Wendy's moment. I once had a woman come through the drive-thru and try to order macaroni and cheese. I politely informed her we did not have that. She insisted we did. I told her we definitely didn't. She got angry and yelled that yes we did. I told her, "Ma'am, I've been working here 3 years. We have never had macaroni and cheese. It's not something we serve. Would you like to order something else?" She says, "Yes you effing do. I can see it on the menu board. It's right there right in front of me on the menu." I tell her I'm really not sure what she's looking at, but we don't have mac and cheese, and if it really does say mac and cheese on our menu board then that means someone vandalized it. She says no, it's definitely part of the menu board and it's real and we do have it, and she isn't leaving until she gets her mac and cheese. Cue quite literally 10 minutes of this back and forth, all while she's holding up the drive-thru line. I finally got the manager to come over and deal with it after asking him for the 15th time because they don't pay me nearly enough to deal with that for that long. The woman absolutely refuses to accept that we don't have mac and cheese. She also refuses to order anything else, and won't move her car until we give her the mac and cheese that we don't have. We have a line of cars wrapped around the building now and everyone is pissed. It's been half an hour and the line has not moved. The manager tells her if she doesn't leave, he's gonna have to call the cops. She screams she can't understand why we're doing all this, and why we won't just serve her mac and cheese when she can clearly see it on our menu board right in front of her, so we do have it, and why are we lying to her? My curiosity and exasperation finally got the better of me, so against my better judgment, I exit the building, walk along the outside to the drive-thru order screen where this woman's car is. I tell her to please show me on the menu where it says the words macaroni and cheese anywhere. She points and confidently says right there. With all the conviction of someone who is absolutely sure they just proved some big dumb idiot wrong and that they will be hailed as a hero. I look where she's pointing. I see it. I sigh heavily as a bit more of my soul dies. I compose myself and say, as politely as I possibly can, "Ma'am, that is a picture of the orange slices that come with the kids' meal. We do not serve mac and cheese. Please drive away before the police get here." She looks confused, looks at the menu board again, the realization dawns on her, and she drives off without a word. I go back inside and scream in the walk-in freezer for 10 minutes. What is something you used to do as a kid, and only realized years later to be extremely inappropriate? I have no idea why, but when I was probably 9 or 10, I got into a yelling match with the older sister of one of my friends. I stormed off and was halfway between her house and my grandparents, maybe 50 yards from each, and we were still yelling when she said something that pissed me off, so I used the worst insult I could. "F you." I screamed. "Who is going to F me?" she asked. Now this presented a bit of a problem since I had no idea what it actually meant, but clearly it was something bad one person did to another, so I considered 2 possible answers. One was that it was like "God damn you" and so God should do the effing. The other was that it was something one person did to another. That seemed much more personal, visceral, and threatening, so I went with that. "Me, you wish you could F me? Yeah, you'd get all the pleasure." At which point I was super confused, and had to concede I'd overstepped my ability with cursing. I just retreated to my grandparents' house, where nothing was said, but I was treated to some disapproving looks. "What happened at your work which caused multiple people to all quit at once?" Owners retired. They were literally the greatest people, both very sweet, but kept the place running like a well-oiled machine. They took pretty good care of us and their restaurant. When they left, they gave the restaurant over to their nephew, who at the time was a busboy/waiter, kind of standoffish, didn't really interact with us too much, a bit lazy at times, but for the most part did his shit and went home. He seemed okay. Until he got the power of being the owner, he fired 4 people, including 2 of the 4 cooks, and 2 of the 3 dishwashers, literally that same day, on a Friday night just before the dinner rush, all because he didn't like their attitude. He refused to allow people to take vacation that they'd already requested and gotten confirmed by the original owners, would change the schedule randomly without telling anyone and then scream at people when they missed a shift or came in late because of it. He'd refuse to replenish the kitchen until we were literally already out of things, then take forever to put in the orders. He showed up randomly and would drink at the bar, for free of course because he was the owner, and then bring in all his buddies to drink with him. Together they'd get way out of hand and grab at women and try to start fights. Within the first month of him being the owner, over half the staff had quit, usually walking out literally in the middle of their shifts. After being screamed at, they'd basically throw down their aprons and tell everyone else that they were so sorry but they couldn't do it anymore. After the last cook, this big dude who usually kept the kitchen laughing and running at a decent pace, started crying in the middle of his shift and dropped everything he was doing after the boss came and yelled at him for being too slow and making slop, then walked out. The rest of us just bailed along with him. 4 months later the place was closed. His aunt and uncle were absolutely furious and devastated that he'd run the business they'd built up for over 30 years into the ground. Serious, police officers, what is the call you wish you hadn't taken? I worked the other side of the radio. I could have done without the major vehicle accident with fire that we went to a few years back. Driver was on the ground in flames, trying to crawl back into the burning vehicle, screaming for help. His baby girl was deceased in the back seat, still strapped into her car seat. That fire was burning so hot that baby was nothing but bones by the time the fire was extinguished. Driver was flown to the hospital with third-degree burns over a large part of his body, and ended up living. It would have been kinder to him if he died on the way to the hospital. I could have done without hearing a man shoot himself while still on the phone with me. I could have done without walking a hysterical father through CPR on his 18-month-old son who he claimed he'd found drowned in the tub. In fact, he'd beaten the kid to death. I could have done without the self-ending call, where the 16-year-old female hung herself from a trellis arch with an extension cord. Her little hands were still clutching the sides of the arch, and the dusty table behind her was covered in scuffs and streaked footprints where she tried to pull herself back up after jumping and almost made it. It's emotionally draining. Most first responders either get numb, get cynical, or get deeply warped senses of humor. I fall into that third category. It's incredibly difficult to make a career as a first responder if you don't learn to laugh. You have to learn how to take the call and move on. Been doing this for 5 years, and sometimes it feels like forever. People who have been denied when they proposed, why did it happen and what was the end result? I was with a girl for just over 5 years. When we met, she was in a bad place. The guy she was with before me used to beat her up and stuff. Really abusive. So it was tough in the beginning because she had major trust issues, self-esteem issues, depression, and she self-harmed. But I went and fell in love with her, helped her get over a lot of the mental anguish she was going through, took her to, and paid for, her therapist every other week. We lived together for 4 of those years. On our 5th anniversary, I proposed. I was madly in love with her, and I assumed she was with me. She said yes. Then, a few months after that, I got off work a bit early, picked up her favorite fish and chips for dinner and headed home. Long story short, I walked in her effing some other dude in our bed, both ass naked. She's riding the guy like an effing cowboy. They didn't even effing hear me come into the apartment. I'll skip the details, but within 2 days of that happening, she was gone. All her stuff out of the apartment. Half of my stuff gone from the apartment, including my cash stash that was several thousand. She took my TV, a bunch of my kitchen stuff. She kept the ring. She took my effing dog, man. Took the damn dog, and I haven't seen or spoken to her since. That was just about 3 years ago now. Kill my dog. Hope your truck enjoys its roll down the mountain XD. I had this cabin in the woods high up on the mountainside. When I bought the property, we were able to buy all the land near the cabin except for one parcel. The previous owner of the entire set of properties had a spoiled son who liked to get drunk and gamble away everything he earned. So we got all but one parcel. He managed to scrape up enough cash to get one parcel right below our cabin. His parcel was entirely surrounded by mine. There's a road going up and over the mountain that first passes by the cabin and continues on through his parcel, finally ending at a pond below that. When he decided to build on the parcel, I granted him an easement for power, water, and road access, which I had my lawyer write up because I was busy in the city. I was trying to be a good neighbor. I only went up on weekends, so I didn't have too many problems. We managed just fine for a few years. I didn't like him much, but we kept to ourselves, though he had a weird habit of sneering at me when he drove by in his girlfriend's car. The police came out a few times because he was fighting with his girlfriend, but he left me alone until one day during a particularly hot August. His girlfriends left him, but he wanted the tracks. He bought a new truck. He liked his new truck. He drove his new truck past my cabin all weekend long, back and forth, non-stop. I was trying to get the last part of a rather difficult book finished and didn't need a Mario Andretti wannabe tearing up my peace of mind. But it was a private road, so any traffic problems had to be settled without the help of law enforcement. I had a sweet cocker spaniel named Mindy who stayed inside most of the time and only went outside to do her business. She was terrified of the big Dodge as he went up and down the mountain throwing gravel and mud everywhere. When I went outside to tell him to stop, he flipped me off, called me a few choice words, and threatened to run me over if I didn't get out of his way. I just shook my head, and went inside, resolving to settle his problem with a lawyer, instead of fighting him. I didn't want to accidentally kill him. He wasn't a very big guy and all mouth anyways. I figured it was the liquor talking. So I walked Mindy and kept her inside that weekend. I had to wear headphones to tune out his act, while living in a cabin in the woods. He was pissed because I bought his father's land, despite the fact that his father left him enough money to buy it several times over. He told my solicitor all of this when he wrote up the easement. My lawyer informed me of this when I contacted him about the dangerous Dodge Dirtbag. He continued driving up and down the mountain like a maniac for the next 4 weekends. He did not stop even in the dead of night. He just went on and won, and I locked my doors hoping he wasn't so deranged that he would set my cabin on fire. Fortunately, the second weekend my lawyer told me to get video and pictures if possible, but not to confront him lest he cook up a song and dance for his own lawyer. So I set up a camera and a game by the corner of my house about 5 yards from the road. I have groceries delivered once a month to the cabin, by the local supermarket in town. The delivery person has instructions to leave the bags on the back porch. I didn't hear her knocking on the 5th weekend, and so she let herself in and put the bags on the kitchen counter. While she was leaving, Mindy slipped outside to do her business but couldn't get back in. I didn't hear her barking, but I did hear her yelps when the drunk bastard ran her over. I ran outside and he's standing over her cursing Mindy. He'd run her over and was taking his twisted frustration out on her while she was dying. So I shoved him away and scooped her up. I then raced into town to see the vet. By the time I got to town she was cold, and I knew it was too late. So I limped back home broken-hearted and angry. I took Monday off and buried her beneath an old bay tree. On Tuesday, I took the footage and the game camera stills into the city and gave them to my lawyer. The pictures were on film, so it took a couple days to get them developed, but the VCR tape told the whole story. He'd seen her beside the cabin and had veered off the road to run her down. The evil grin on Red face looked demonic. I asked my lawyer if I could sue him. He said I could and we had plenty of evidence to cause him serious harm, but in the meantime he'd still be living there and things would only escalate. At the time, dogs were considered property and didn't have anything in the way of rights. Still don't, which is a pity, but I wanted a fight, and my lawyer knew that if he didn't throw me a bone I'd go back up that mountain and beat the dirtbag to death with his own wrenched-off arm. My lawyer calmed me down and took out the lease agreement. In it was a standard maintenance clause, but there was also a stipulation in the easement that prohibited acts that might disturb the peace and harmony of the owner. It had a quit clause that automatically rescinded his easement should he persist in such acts for a month or more. My lawyer had sent him a letter to the effect the second week and didn't get a reply. The mail was registered and he had to sign for it in town at the post office. I had my lawyer serve him with a quit notice. In that state, a notice to quit an easement doesn't have the same level of difficulty as a notice to quit tenancy, which can drag out for 6 months or more. If you are in violation of an easement rights and are ordered to quit it by the owner, you can appeal, but in the interim you must by law stay off the easement, and any utilities passing through can be cut off at the owner's pleasure unless doing so can cause a life-threatening situation. But I didn't cut off his water and power right away. We didn't start proceedings on the suit until later. He continued to drive on the road after the order to quit, only faster and with more profanity. I got it all on tape. I told him so, and he said he didn't care. He said ugly F like me should just die. So I decided to stay away until the suit was initiated. So, a month later I had workers on the mountain put in a nice gate, solid construction in 3 feet of concrete. I could open and close it with a garage door opener. I had barbed wire fence around the whole property, so the only way in or out was via the gate. I had a pedestrian gate put in beside the road and left that unlocked. It was about a quarter mile to the cabin and half again that to his own place. A fairly long walk for a raging alcoholic. I got good pictures of him on the game camera that weekend. Dirtbag driving up to the gate in his big truck. Dirtbag trying to jimmy the lock. Dirtbag leaving and returning with a hacksaw to try to cut lock. Dirtbag leaving in frustration. Dirtbag returning with his truck. Dirtbag leaving again. Dirtbag ramming the gate uphill at full speed. Finally dirtbag through windshield laying on hood. His smashed truck rolls back down the mountain. The gate didn't even bend. The truck sure did. He lived, still not as ugly as me, but we can't get everything we want. Coworker tried to get me fired over breast implants, so I pulled a reverse Uno card. 4 years ago now, when I was 24, my mom died of breast cancer, and as both my grandmothers had also died of it, I saw a specialist for a screening. I found out I had some cells in one of my breasts that could have turned cancerous at any given moment. I was told I had a few options. I could have regular screenings every 3 or 4 months until it does develop into cancer. I was told the risk of the cells becoming cancerous was very high due to family history, but it could also potentially never could turn, so I'd just be getting these screenings for no reason. I could get a single mastectomy on the breast with the bad cells, but they'd need to keep an eye on the other one, so I'd still need regular checkups for the other breast. I could get a bilateral mastectomy and remove all of my breast tissue, basically eliminating the risk. I went for the bilateral mastectomy. It was admittedly the most drastic option, but after seeing what cancer did to my mom and grandmothers, I didn't want to risk it. I was warned about scarring but told it should be fairly minor. It wasn't, and I was left with 2 huge, pink, jagged scars on either side of my chest, each about 1 inch long and half an inch wide. and it caused me to go into a severe depression, where it got to the stage of me not even leaving my flat because I didn't want people to see me, throwing out my mirrors, and getting physically sick looking at myself. I went to a therapist, who suggested a plastic surgeon. The therapist said they'd never normally do that, but it was clearly something I was struggling with and I might never get over it, and the therapist could see why I struggle with it. Although I'll admit the therapist did send me to ask about scar reduction. The plastic surgeon suggested a cream, a laser or implants. The cream didn't work, and the laser was both expensive and risky, so I went with the implants. My natural boobs were an F cup, so I went with a slightly smaller DD. Since then my mental health has improved and I feel a lot better about the way I look. My confidence has gone up, as has my self-esteem. I know I shouldn't put so much into my appearance, but I wasn't exaggerating about these scars. Huge, bright pink, jagged, raised, just really awful to look at, and I hated seeing myself. And they are now nicely hidden away and you can barely feel them. In the present day, I'm 28 years old and working in an office. I'm doing a lot better than I was. My coworker, Jill, found out I'd had a boob job, but not about the cancer thing. When myself and my friend from years before the mastectomy were planning a holiday, and she made a joke about me going on a plane with my implants, and Jill overheard. By the end of the day, the entire office knew I'd had a boob job, but not why, and half a dozen people confirmed Jill had told them. Over the next few months Jill made many jokes and comments about my chest to coworkers when I was in earshot, at one point saying I had more plastic than Barbie and calling me fake in 2 ways. I didn't hear this one myself, but a friend in the office told me that Jill had at one point referred to me as a sack of silicone. IDK what her problem was exactly, but at one point she mentioned the NHS, so I assumed Jill thought that I'd got my tits done for free on taxpayer money. I'd gotten the mastectomy on NHS but gone private for therapy and implants. I asked her to stop more than once, but unfortunately the places I'd talked to her were places like the lift and the women's bathroom, where there weren't any cameras, and Jill just kept making comments no matter how often I asked her not to. I wouldn't say it was every single day, but I heard at least 3 comments per week for 3 months. I hit my breaking point when me, Jill and a few other coworkers were having lunch. I referred to something as being shallow and Jill said you'd know all about being shallow while gesturing to my chest. I snapped. I said, do you know why I have these? A few years ago the doctors found potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I was advised to get a mastectomy and was left with huge ugly scars on my chest. I went to see a therapist who sent me to a cosmetic surgeon, who advised me to get implants to hide the scars, and I did just so I could look at myself in the mirror without crying. So maybe next time you want to judge someone for having cosmetic surgery, you should ask them why they had it first. And feeling like that was a mic drop moment, I picked up my food and left. For the rest of the day I had about 1/3 of my office come up to me and offer support, and the rest tell me that Jill was just joking around and I was being a bitch. I replied that Jill was being a bitch long before I was. I then got an email from HR saying they wanted to talk to me the following day, and when I called for clarification they mentioned a hostile work environment. Note, this is apparently an American term and holds little weight in England, but it's what was said over the phone. I knew the person who signed off the email and I'd spoken to. Her name was Debbie, and she was Jill's friend in HR, so I was fairly confident on who had reported me. I realized that if this was already being sent to HR, I needed as much ammunition as possible, so I went about collecting my information. As Debbie had dealt with me so far, it was safe to assume she would be the person reviewing the complaint with me, and if that was true I was fucked. However, I vaguely remembered a section on complaints that was in my contract when I first signed with the company. I flicked through the contract and there was a part in complaints section that said I was contractually allowed to request a change of reviewer if I felt my allocated reviewer was biased. It was called an impartial overseer. I photocopied the page and highlighted that part. Then I messaged the people who had offered their support over Facebook, and said basically, HR have asked to see me. Do any of you remember Jill insulting me to your face, and are you willing to write and sign something saying what you heard and when? Not everyone was willing to help, as Jill is somewhat feared in the office due to her befriending HR and management, but about 20 people were willing to help me. I guessed roughly when I'd asked Jill to stop previously. The 4 asks over the last few months, some timings were easy to guess as they'd happen on my break or when I'd first arrived at work, and I wrote them all down, along with a rough time of when the lunchroom confrontation happened and a list of names of who was there for the lunchroom confrontation. I got to work slightly early the next morning. I went round everyone who had messaged me and most of them managed to give me a printed and signed letter. Some didn't manage to write one but NBD. This isn't exact words as there's 16 letters to sum up here, but the gist was, my name is, their name. I work with Jill last name and op, on, date, at, time, approx. I spoke with Jill last name, during which she referred to op as, quoted insult. I felt this was inappropriate as it directly related to op's appearance and am willing to go on record further to establish that Jill last name has been discussing op in the workplace in the same manner for 3 months now, causing me discomfort and creating what I feel is a hostile work environment. Signed, their name. I wound up with about 16 letters, all from different people, and one of them was in the lunchroom for my conversation with Jill. Some even had bullet-pointed lists of everything Jill had said to them about me or other people. As it turns out, Jill has issues with a lot of people's appearances. She apparently made comments about one coworker's weight, and something anti-Semitic about a different coworker's nose, all of which were put in these letters. There are about 45 people in the office, so while 16 wasn't a majority, it's still a decent amount. The letters weren't hugely long, most were only a paragraph, but they had all the necessary information. I was asked to come to HR at 10 a.m. I took the letters from coworkers, the photocopy of the page in my contract, and my dates and times in a little folder with me. I got there and Debbie was the one overseeing the interview. She got up from her desk, ready to lead me into another room. I immediately turned to the other HR worker that was currently there and said, "So is my meeting with you, then?" Debbie said, "No, you're with me." I replied that this wouldn't sit well with me, as my contract states I have a right to an impartial overseer, and as I said this I took the contract page out of my folder. Debbie read it. I wouldn't let her take the paper when there was a shredder so close by, and said she could be impartial. I replied that I really didn't mean to be a pain, but I had it on good authority that the person on the other end of this complaint is her friend, and my contract does say I'm allowed an impartial overseer. Debbie stomped off to get supervisor. Supervisor asks how I know she can't be impartial, and I tell him that I have it on good authority that the Jill, who was on the other end of this complaint, is a close friend of Debbie. He asked Debbie if this was true, to which she only replied I can be impartial. Supervisor took a deep breath, asked the other HR rep to come with him, and the four of us all went to review the complaint. I thanked them for being so accommodating. I was worried I'd annoyed them. Debbie took out the complaint and all three of them went through it with me. Debbie looked homicidal the whole time the interview was happening, as she had clearly anticipated firing me, or at least recommending me being fired. The interview went something like this. It took like over half an hour and they kept asking me the same questions but phrased different ways, so this is a really drastically condensed version. Check out part 2 to hear the interview.